Hi, and welcome to podcast number 14. We have a very special guest today, international guest, flying in from Nairobi.
Nairobi, Kenya.
Nairobi, Kenya. So we have Binny Brahmbhatt-Sharma, who originally from Mumbai.
Originally from Mumbai, yes.
Yes, and now working in the field of mental health in Nairobi. Binny, welcome to Samarpan. Welcome to Samarpan, Mumbai. You've been to Samarpan, Mulshi.
Yes, I have.
Sometime back. It's probably a little while now, isn't it? Probably earlier in the year.
In fact, last year.
Last year,
December.
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah. So welcome. Just to sort of start, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the work you're doing with people in Nairobi?
Sure. First of all, namaste. Binny here, and I call myself an adolescent mental health consultant, teen mentor, mental strength coach to professional athletes, and a licensed psychologist. And I said that in that order because from where I see the world, I feel there is still a huge stigma regarding therapies and mental health, and especially with children, especially with teenagers. Parents don't just wake up and say, okay, let me take them to a therapist. And so under the umbrella of being a consultant or a mentor, it's a little bit safer for parents to say, okay, let's reach out to her. Yes. And then this guides as a safe space for them to share. And if we are dealing with something really deeper, then we handhold and work with a team of clinical psychologists.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what I do for a living. And I've been a TEDx speaker, if that helps.
Okay. Very varied. So lots of stuff. I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier before we came in, when we was talking about adolescent. Obviously, we know that there's a lot of issues within the adolescent. We're going to focus a little bit more on adolescent stuff today because that's your particular area of work. Can you give a bit of an overview of what you sort of see as some of the issues that our adolescents sort of are facing at this time, and also the family actually in general, because it's not just the adolescents.
Correct. Yeah. So I think one of the fundamental things that got me into this was the realization that teenagers are more stressed than adults. Today's statistics say that highest amount of suicide cases in adolescents today than ever before. Highest amount of mental health conditions, something as simple, if one can say, as depression, panic attacks, is something that's as common as common flu in teenagers today, right? So these are the things which I feel are most undervalued, not talked about.
Yes. Correct?
So that's happening. Migraines, panic attacks, depression, mental health conditions, that's happening. Let's take, for example, COVID. When COVID happened, the whole world, of course, was supposed to focus on survival needs. Yes. And the pressures and the stressors and just going through this whole pandemic. However, very less has been spoken about what happened with teenagers or children, right? So what I'm seeing today is that if you look at anyone, any adult or any parent we speak to, we always talk about the next generation, or we're doing a lot for our children, or everything is about our children. However, when it comes to these granular things, which are so much more important, we barely speak about it, we deflect it, we put it under the carpet, and we probably live in the world where we feel everything is okay. But let me tell you, it isn't. So I would like to say that as far as mental health for adolescents is concerned, we really need to take it seriously. We really need to start talking about it. We have to wake up every morning and just have a self-check. Is my child okay? Is he having a lot of panic attacks? Even if he mentions something like he's not feeling okay, or can he have a mental health break day? I think that needs to be taken seriously. So I'm looking at that almost every child, and in fact, I would like to add here that 10 out of 10 children are going through panic attacks and anxiety attacks. 10 out of 10. So if you're reading those statistics where they say 1 in 4, let me tell you, in my last almost a decade experience, what I'm seeing is it's 10 in 10, including my own children. So it's nothing to do with who you are as a parent, but this is something that's happening.
Okay, you mentioned COVID, and I'll bookmark that for a moment, because I think there is a lot to talk about and how that has impacted, adolescents, teenagers, and children in general. What is it that you think is the some of the contributing factors other than COVID that is seeing this sort of rise in issues in our younger generation? I'm a parent, so I'm a parent myself, and I've had personal experience of my daughter particularly struggling in her mid-teens as well. So what do you think are some of the sort of contributing? What's different now than maybe when we were?
I think this is something that I get to be asked a lot as to, but we went through this too.
Yeah.
So let me first just take our attention back to a little bit of a neuroscience towards a teenage brain. Okay, yeah. So this part of our brain, and you must be knowing this, you're an expert, but this part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of our brain, the CEO of our brain. And it completely develops to do its job by the age of 25. Okay? Does that mean that your children, probably who are teenagers, are probably not having that section yet? No, they do, but it's work in progress. It's not ready to do its job to help them choose or make wise decision in an impulsive moment. So that's number one. That means that teenagers are completely emotional beings. Their emotional part of the brain, the amygdala, is completely developed. And that's why sometimes you see an adult-like human being in your house who's probably taller than you and looks like a full-fledged adult, but guess what? They're still children.
Yes.
They will be prone to impulsive decisions. They will have larger-than-life experiences in their head. So every small thing can feel like, oh my God, this is just happening to me.
Yes.
That's also the reason why you go through as a parent, what were you thinking? Those moments where you think, what were you thinking? That's exactly how their brain is supposed to be. It is supposed to be based on in-the-moment decision. So that's number one. That's science, all right?
Yep.
Now, knowing what we know about that, what a child really needs is a safe space where they can speak, where they can have a conversation, where they don't feel judged or shamed.
Mm-hmm.
They feel seen, heard, and understood,
yeah.
Right? Now, in the world that we live in today, it's actually the opposite. So there is humongous amount of pressure, performance pressure from schools, from parents, correct? Number 3, the age of 9 to 19. Now that's the age where you're going through identity crisis. Your identity as to who you are, what are your values, completely develops by the age of around 23, 25. So between the 9 to 19, if each of us here ask ourselves, how did we see ourselves when we looked in the mirror? We constantly were fault-finding machines. Yes. Something was not okay with us. So they are going through this identity crisis. If that's not enough, they are going through hormonal changes.
Yep.
And acne, and the phase of not being good enough, right? So, and over and above this, there is the entire performance pressure. And to a large extent, at least that's how I have seen my worldview while I was growing up, that you usually got a lot of praise and love when we were performing.
Yes.
Right? So somewhere these children feel that if they are not getting the A stars, or they're not getting the relevant percentage, or they're not getting the relevant trophies, then they're not worthy of love. So between the neuroscience and the psychological aspect and the hormonal aspect and the environmental aspect, they are completely in a space of chaos, completely falling apart. Now, this is where, I'm sure, Martin, you think, but we went through this too. The science was applicable.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it. I mean, when you mentioned like acne and things like that, all those things, I can sort of remember sort of having acne, sort of, but yeah, a lot of that stuff was there. But I think there's probably a little bit more these days than.
Correct. So when we say that, and I do get a lot of parents who tell me, but we turned out okay. And I do agree that yes, to a large extent, we turned out okay.
Yeah.
I may have questions about that some days, but however, there were certain fundamental things that our brain requires for us to turn into this healthy thinking minds, which for all of us during our generation, it was a given. And let's talk about number 1, nature and sunlight. That was a given. During our times, this was something that we used to walk to school, we used to get good, we were blessed with sunshine. At least I'll talk about this part of the world.
Yeah, definitely not in my part of the world, but yeah.
But at least 6 months of the year.
True.
Yeah, so
True,
let's talk about that. Number 2, nature, time in nature.
Yeah.
Right? Number 3, unstructured playtime.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is when we were having those moments which were mundane, but actually magic was being created in our brains at those times. Those mundane moments of playing with your friends, being outside, being in nature is where actually healthy neurons are being built.
Yeah.
Healthy neural pathways are being built. What does that do? It helps us to memorize better, learn better, release our happy hormones.
Yes.
And look at now at our children. They are constantly filled with either screen time or concrete structures.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we didn't have screen time.
No,
so what did
no.
that do? We had more deeper connections.
Yeah.
So we were being raised with larger families, a community, an uncle, an aunt, and nieces and cousins. And even at the end of the day, we had no other choice but to come together as family, help set dining table, eat food, but still be together and have deeper connections.
Yes.
Whether we could tolerate our sisters or siblings or not, that's another story. But we still had that.
Yeah.
Whereas for children of today, even parents are constantly on their phone. And I'm not judging them. I'm just saying it with a lot of grace, but that's the way
it's a really good point, because if I sort of remember back when I was a kid, so we're talking probably, well, we're looking at sort of, quite a few years ago. I grew up in the sort of 70s, 80s, so the issue that my family would have would be, Martin, you need to come in now. You
Absolutely.
you've been out. It's getting dark now.
Yeah.
You need to come in.
Yeah.
Whereas I think now, when my bit would be trying to get they're not kids anymore. I mean, mine are sort of older now. My youngest is 19. Would be, when are you going out? Are you going to go out?
Absolutely. I was listening to this certain Indian celebrity talk about it, that during our days at home, our elders were asking us to keep it low. People would be screaming and talking and fighting and being silly.
Yeah.
And now there's you enter a home, you barely listen to anything because kids are constantly on their phone, on screen, on games.
Yes.
Now, one of the things today science has outrightly proven within enough evidences as to how bad is screen time for our brain. And now think about children. Ours is a fully developed brain, and think about children 9 to 19-year-olds. We are giving them, sometimes I've seen, and I'm sure you'd agree, again, no disrespect or no judgment to any parent listening to this, but the reality is even 4-year-olds in a restaurant are having iPads while they're eating. And I think that's devastating to their brain.
Yeah, I think it's probably even probably now, and you say about 4-year-olds, and 2-year-olds are given an iPad
Absolutely.
now, and you try and take that away from a young child.
And there's a tantrum about that.
Yeah.
So to sum it up, I would say especially these 3 or 4 parameters that I mentioned. Number 1, time in nature,
Yeah.
which is essential for our brain, which the children are not getting, which we used to get.
Yes.
Number 2, outdoor unstructured playtime,
Yes.
which again children are not getting. We
Yeah.
used to get it
Yes.
abundantly. Number 3, deeper connections
Yes.
with human beings. We are social beings.
Yes.
And we used to get it as a given because we had larger
Yeah.
families. Today, children are being raised in families where both the parents are working.
Yeah, I think I've said this before, that in these days, we're more connected than ever through screens and phones, but we are much more disconnected than we have ever been.
Absolutely.
I think if you go around and so often I see it. I'm guilty sometimes. I'm guilty myself of using the phone and things. But you will see people that go out. They sit at a table in a restaurant, and no one's actually having a conversation.
No one's having a conversation.
They're just sat there, just sort of just looking at their screens.
Absolutely.
I don't think when I was a kid, wasn't even allowed to watch TV during mealtime. Mealtime was absolutely safe.
We didn't have so many channels. We just had. I mean, I remember while growing up, there was just one particular day. It was a program came. The whole family were so excited about a program, irrespective of what we liked or didn't. And everyone just sat together and watched, and that is also building connections.
Yeah.
And something else that I read is this generation of teenagers are finding it harder and harder to make friends. And I have not only, of course, read about it, but I'm witnessing it when I have my group sessions. I witness that children come, if I just let them be as they are, and I try and go a little bit later and just witness what's going on. The first thing I enter my studio is a group of 15, 20 children. Even if they've known each other for now few months through these programs, they'll still be first on their phone. They'll just say hello and they'll go back.
Yeah.
Notice teenagers around you. When you see them, it's so much more easier to feel safe for them through the screen rather than through eye contact and conversation with another human being.
Yeah.
And that's one of the bigger aspects which sometimes worries me, because I think friendship is one of the most important part of a healthy life.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
We talk about sort of all the screen. What is it that what is this resulting in teenagers sort of doing? I mean, what sort of tends to happen there? Because we talk about the screen, but what is the outcomes of this? What is tending to happen? I mean, you did mention a little bit around about panic attacks and depression, anxiety, those types of things. But what else is sort of going on?
What else is going on is, let me again reiterate. What I am seeing today is there is panic attacks, there is depression, there is migraines, but most importantly, a blanket acting out behavior. Okay, and for everyone else, acting out behavior is something like not just limited to someone slamming the door or being rude to you. Acting out behavior is also self-harming. Acting out and just to break it down further for people who are listening, acting out behavior, and when I say self-harming, it also means sometimes you'll see your teenager wearing probably a thicker rubber band or something around their wrist. As a parent, I would say look deeper into it. Sometimes there could be cuts. So that's self-harming. Acting out behavior is your child leaning into vaping, into marijuana usage. Self-harming behavior is leaning into acting out sexually, especially a lot in girls, of course in boys. Sometimes if you see a 14-year-old wanting to look like a 21-year-old and wearing clothes which are appropriate for an adult but not for a child, because a 16-year-old could be probably 5'8" and could look like an adult, but they are just children. So if you're noticing your child acting out in these capacities, they are definitely trying to numb some emotional pain.
For a parent, this is an area that you work in, and I think it's really important for parents, if they're listening or watching this at the moment. This is not around about criticising parenting and stuff. I think parenting is probably the most difficult thing.
You and I both.
Yeah, believe me. I mean, I'm really no expert to be giving parental advice or anything like that. I think it's a learn on the job sort of thing, and I think most parents will get some things right and some things wrong.
Oh, you're always going to get something wrong. Let me be honest.
Often wrong, particularly because like you say, there's neuroscience and sciences going on as well, hormonal changes and stuff like that. So even if you're right, you're going to be wrong.
Absolutely.
But what would you be sort of saying to parents about what can they do to try and what are some of the things? I mean, you mentioned a little bit about some of the things to look out for, but what are some of the things that they can do to try and make things a little bit easier, or maybe sort of...
Yeah, in fact, if you give me that chance, I would say a huge list of things. But To begin with, I think time is one of the biggest gift you can give any human being that you love, starting with your children. And to me, time equals presence, that equals love, and you can see it in your own, be your own scientist and look for evidences when you felt the most safe as a human being is when someone has actually given you attuned presence. That means what I and you are giving each other, that we are looking at each other, we are talking, that means we are with each other in that moment. And that's what a child needs. That's the fundamental need of every child, to feel connected, to feel that their parents are listening. So if you could probably just 20 minutes a day, just 20 minutes a day, spend time with your child where you are present, attuned presence, that means you are listening more and talking less. Number two, you are not shaming them, you're not blaming them, you're not judging them. That comes down to, again, less speaking, more listening. And I think just in the middle, probably asking, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to help? 20 minutes of that with your phone away, with everything else away, is all your child needs. The faster you start that, the better. That's number one. The number two, second thing that I would really recommend is start having your own screen time boundaries. That means as a family, I know sometimes this is so difficult, but I know it. But as a family, start having rules where meal times, no phone, face-to-face conversations, no phone. And it's less to do with you and your children, but more to do with you and your partner. Because I think when children see you and your spouse or your partner probably talking to each other, but not being there, physically present, and you're just on your phone and you're multitasking, they're also picking that up. So if you make that as a boundary, that when we're having a face-to-face conversation, we keep the phone away, most often than not. And sometimes it's okay, because you do have a life, you do run your businesses. So it's okay, but it's always okay to communicate and say, hey, just give me a moment, can I just finish this email, and I'm going to be with you right away. The moment you say that, you've made your partner or your child feel heard. The moment you do that, your child is witnessing that. So they learn that too. So when you are talking to your 16-year-old, they'll also have the same grace, and they say that, hey, let me finish this, mom, and I'm coming back to you right away. So number two, screen time boundaries. I think as long as you're maintaining these two things, one of the things I always remind this to parents is start focusing on your relationship with self, because all your judging, blaming, shaming, and again, I'm not judging this when I say this, but as a parent, if I could, have a self-disclosure moment, all our judging, shaming, and blaming behavior comes from us being somewhere really frustrated with life, or overstretched with life. And if you look at our typical behavior, sometimes when we are overstretched, we rarely project that with our bosses or with our colleagues. We usually project that on people who are a little bit below us in power dynamics. So maybe our driver or somebody who works for us, or most often than not for mothers, it's children. So if you could, as parent, literally start focusing on your own self-time, and when I'm saying self-care, I'm not talking about manicure, and I'm not taking that away, but I'm talking about connecting to yourself, taking like a 5-minute check-in with myself. How am I feeling? What am I feeling? Working on yourself will make you feel lighter. You feeling lighter will ensure that that light comes out towards your children. And this is all across to both parents, not just mothers. And then through that, the last thing is your own relationship with your partner. Because this is another thing which is most underrated, and I see that with parents, that when they are raising children, I see a lot of us parents completely focused on them. But I think that if we get it right with our relationship, they witness that, and when they witness that, then a lot gets better when they are being raised. So if the way you speak to your partner, the way you're present with your partner, the way you show your love or conflicts, or how you address those, is what makes a difference in the way they walk in the world and address conflicts for themselves. So I think these 4 things would be something that parents, but it starts always with time.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I think you made another point earlier as well, that often know in families that both parents work. That's probably a change from a lot of people when they, if you go back sort of 20, I don't know for India, but certainly in the UK, if you went back sort of 30 years ago, then, not often both parents didn't work. One would work part-time. The dad would probably be working full-time and the mum maybe part-time. It was not, whereas now,
Now,
yeah.
if I may take us back and shift the gear a little bit, but that is one of the most fundamental need of a child, is to have nurturing parents, physically available parents.
Yeah.
And in those days it was a given.
Yes.
Okay, and that's where I said let me shift the gear a bit, because if you look at fundamentally men, if you look at our ancestors, they are the providers.
Yes.
They are the protectors. They would go out in the world, hunt, keep us safe, keep our boundaries safe, come back home and ensure that the food was on table.
Yes.
Women were nurturers. Okay, women were supposed to keep the community together, cook for everyone, take care of the extended families. Now those are our roles. It's less to do with how it's perceived today. Okay, if you look back at our ancestors, those were our roles.
Yeah.
Now I know times are changing and a lot needs to change along with time. But the fundamental need of a human being, of feeling connected, of feeling loved, of feeling nurturing, and of a child to feel safe, does come from mother to a large extent. And what today the evidence is and the studies show is that even though both parents are working, which is great, it's needed sometimes, a lot of times actually, but if the roles could be addressed in a way where one parent could be working 100% to provide for the school fees and the further education and the lifestyle, the other parent, even if they are working, needs to dial down to about 60% or 50%. So that means they know that they'd be available for the sports days and for the prom night, because that's what children need. So as long as you have that balance intact, that means somewhere your child is going to get one parent who's going to be much more available for the physical presence and the conversations and the growing up years. As long as that is managed, then everything does fall in place. But when that balance goes for a toss is when, that's what I'm again reminding through this conversation, that you may think that the behavior of vaping or alcohol or acting out is bad. I would say that let's look and ask ourselves, why are they doing that? Why are they having a panic attack? Why are they vaping? Why are they leaning towards drugs or alcohol use? Because somewhere deep down they're not feeling the connection. Because somewhere deep down they don't feel seen, safe, heard. But most importantly, what I see as a child is a sense of not belonging anywhere, not being able to fit in anywhere. And that's why I said I'll shift the gear, that yes, sometimes you think of your jobs and your careers and you see that this is something that is important. It is, but we all can work through our numbers, and if you really know that you are at a certain level of income, that's not my job to decide, but it's my experience to share that if you know that you're at a certain level of income, and after that your happiness level through your income is not going to be increasing, then in that case, ask yourself how much time and presence can you provide for your children.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You're from originally from Mumbai. You live in Kenya now. Do you see any differences between the countries and any sort of cultural differences, or do you feel that this is very much across the board?
So I work with clients in about 8 countries. One of the good things about COVID and virtual lifestyle is that, and I'm seeing this, that whether it's Singapore, whether it's Dubai, whether it's UK, whether it's India, whether it's Kenya, whether it's Mauritius, or it's Canada, this behavior that I'm talking about, this level of sense of disconnection that I'm talking about is all across. All across.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that.
You don't see that, yeah.
It's just happening all over the world.
Yeah, I mean, but everything that you've sort of so far mentioned, I can sort of, you know, I've experienced.
Absolutely.
I've experienced that, and you know, so, and I've lived in Southeast Asia, and it's similar.
True, absolutely.
So, I said to you earlier I was going to bookmark COVID because
I was hoping. I was like, when is that coming?
Yeah. You know, I mean, I'll be honest. I found COVID really difficult for myself. I think that was, you know, it was very difficult. You know, it was almost like the lights went out.
Oh yes.
You know, I think sort of, you know, there we were going along in our world day to day, and then all of a sudden it was like you have to stay at home.
Yeah.
That you know, there's all these restrictions and that was difficult for me as an adult. What was it, you know, I mean, what do you feel, you know, for children? Because I really struggled. I mean, I certainly would say probably after about 2 months, probably the first month was a bit of a novelty.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think most people enjoyed it.
Yeah. The first month was like, wow, I like this.
This is like a holiday, you know. But you know, then all of a sudden it was like, this isn't a holiday anymore. This is actually quite.
Yeah.
So you know, do you want to talk a little bit about COVID and the impact that has had on our younger generations? Because I think it was huge.
It was huge. It was devastating for children, if I can use that term. And I'll walk you through what happened, okay? From an eyes of a 14-year-old, from an eyes of a 12-year-old, from an eyes of a 16-year-old, all they are seeing is like a doom of stress and fear. And when I say this word stress and fear, actually imagine yourself in a room filled of smoke of that. And why is this exaggerated for children? Is because to a large extent, even though each of us as adults were suffering, scared, worried, losing people, there was still a lot that was in our control. For two reasons. One, we are adults. Okay? Stress is eventually how you perceive the situation. Okay? And that's a simple definition of it. So, one, at a certain time in life, if you are above the age of 25, you have a choice to probably click on a button and decide to do an in-house yoga session or get onto Insight Timer and do a breathwork session.
Yes.
Okay? Or have a 4-hour continuous PlayStation time, or go out or call home friends and start drinking and having a party. These are the choices adults could still make. Okay, and I'm not in any way taking away the pain and the struggle of parents here or adults here. But what I'm asking you to do is just for another few minutes, shift the gear and think about a 12-year-old who has probably nothing in their control. One of the most important things for a 12-year-old or a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 16-year-old is socialization, is waking up, changing, going to school. And let me tell you, the best part of school life is friendships. It's outside of the classrooms. Okay, so yes, nobody enjoys that level of studying except very few percentage. But what they really enjoy is waking up, seeing their friends, talking, even though if they are having a little bit of on and off days. Imagine all the good things being snatched away of your life. But the most difficult thing still being made to do is studying through screen time. They would have been more than happy if education was taken away. But obviously in the world that we live in, we can't do that because we've been taught things have to move on. We have to move on. You know, toughen up. Life has to move on. Yeah. And that's the message everyone was giving. So for children, all the great parts was taken away. And the most, in a way, sometimes horrific parts of school life was forced upon them through screen. Okay, so imagine now from 7:30 to 3:30, every adult's job is to keep you busy. Imagine how out of control your brain would feel. And mind you, again, it's the emotional brain, which is the reactive brain, which is completely in control. So what that did was, and I'm not kidding when I say this, and this is what I mean, that people don't talk about this enough. Let's, again, self-disclosure, let me talk about my daughter. And I remember that after the COVID period passed, this was now her final year. She was in her Diploma 2 program, which is like A levels. You can go into A levels, IB year. She went to an IB school. And something switched in the manner in which she could study. And mind you, she is she's a physics lover, so she loves her studies. But she couldn't come home and study. And she kept telling me, I'm just unable to do this. So I said, okay, let's shift the space. And so we shifted the space and we said, how about you go to a nice coffee shop, take your laptop there, study, and everything changed for her. Not only that, I started giving this option to other kids. I said, hey, you can come to my studio. You want to study, you can work. I have this beautiful green space, you've seen it probably on videos. I said, just come and study there. And that shifted. And what that showed me was that it was COVID. If your child during COVID times was in that area where they studied their room, that room became like a trauma pod for them. They could not come back and feel safe anymore. Because that's the place now where the bullies were pulling. The teachers were calling you up. So the safe space was taken away, which was earlier their home.
Yes.
And so a lot of children, and I don't know how many teens would be listening to this, but I can guarantee you teens who are listening would say she gets us when I say this. Because I've witnessed children not being able to study through screens anymore, feeling panic attacks, feeling like overwhelmed in the same area if they're studying in the room. But you give them another place, they're able to focus better. So that's number 2. So that's another impact that COVID had. Most importantly, this is how I feel, probably I have read for sure, but I also feel and believe this, and I wish we could actually come up with that kind of data, that say if we picked about 20 to 30 year olds, okay, of today's time, and if we could have had brain scans of them when they were in their teens, which was pre-COVID, okay, and if we could take the children who were going through COVID and their brain scans, and then if we compare them to that, I can guarantee you their brains have shape-shifted. I believe this from the gut, from the knowing, from the experience. This is one of the fundamental reasons post-COVID, every child is getting a panic attack and an anxiety attack and a meltdown. Because somewhere their brain did shape-shift. We just don't have that data to an extent, or at least I'm not aware about that data to an extent. And this wasn't the case before COVID. So yeah, this was devastating for children.
I think you make the point that you make about all of a sudden the school was in their own safe space. I think that's a big thing for a lot of kids. You know, home was that safe space, and all of a sudden that you know, school came into the classroom. You know, schools aren't always the nicest.
They're not.
Places growing up.
They are not.
Kids are cruel.
They're not.
You know.
And let's, I mean, if I may say this here, I've not even like fully talked about actually what was going on in every children's home. Because now they are first-hand seeing the dynamics of their parents as a relationship. If your children are going from 7:30 to 3:30, then sent off to tennis, then sent off to math tuition, by the time they come home, they barely see their parents. Right? So even if we do have differences or conflicts, it's something that children don't get to see. They just get a vibe of it, but they don't actually get to see firsthand. Imagine if a father is I'm sure you would agree this, that a lot of adults during COVID leaned towards addiction, who were probably heavy drinkers. Post-COVID came on the other side. Imagine children are witnessing this. So
that's a good point, because that's definitely my experience of working with people, and you know, what people have sort of spoken to me about is that, you know, people used to go, when people go to the office, they're in the office, there's a set of rules. You know, there's a set of rules. Come into the office. Now, all of a sudden, for some people, it's like, well, it's 11 o'clock, I'll have a drink. You know, and I think, you know, people were, I think people were drinking. I'm not saying all people, but there was certain a significant amount of people. The increase in their drinking. I'm going to use alcohol here. I don't necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there's other stuff, but
Absolutely.
Alcohol, particularly because it's available, it's legal and stuff. So I think people's intake of drinking, increased in a lot of aspects. So kids are exposed to that. Well, we talked a little bit about. I mean, what do you see with kids? And I don't necessarily want to use the word addiction because I don't think it's a helpful word for adolescents to necessarily hear, because I do think in a lot of cases that our younger, growing up adolescents, they experiment, they do stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that it develops into an addiction per se. So I think but what do you sort of see sort of use of, and I'm using use as opposed to addiction, the use or prevalence of alcohol and drugs in teenagers?
For me, I kind of got, my attention went towards your statement when you said that you don't want to use the word addiction. Honestly, that kind of made me pause, and ask you. Of course you explain, but I want to ask you then, what would you call that? Like, what would you think it is if it is not sometimes like addiction?
I think a lot of, this is the way I would look at it would be that it's a substance use or substance abuse. It wouldn't necessarily be to the point where they're dependent. I think addiction is, addiction is really when people become, dependent. I think that's probably the differential.
Yeah.
So that it's all consuming. But that's not to say that kids or teenagers don't.
Yeah.
I think
you said it right. What it is also helping me see is, because this is very, this is a space which is also a messy space as a professional who works with teenagers. That's why I got more. Yeah, it's a very messy space, because what you said was right, that we, when we talk about addicts, in our mind we have a framework, or addiction, sorry, not addicts. I take that back. But when we talk about addiction as a behavior, we kind of have an understanding around it that it is something which is dependent, which affects our relationships, our career, and so obviously there is a time to it. That means we are looking at a certain number of years of usage somewhere. Unfortunately, because they are children, and I'll again say that they're just children, we don't have that data to see a 5-year prolonged use. By the time it is 5 years, they're almost in their 20s.
Yeah.
Correct? And to me, that's a messy space, because what I am seeing is, because it's a simple formula but very painful when we live it. But because children most often are not feeling seen enough, heard enough, understood enough, and validated enough with their emotions and their feelings. And I'll repeat this because this is very, very important. If children are not feeling seen enough, heard enough, understood enough, validated enough in their emotional space and with their feelings, they have no place but to find something that makes them feel seen enough, heard enough, validated enough, understood enough. Almost a huge percentage of children are going through this painful stage of not fitting in because of the social media, because of the cyberbullying, because of constantly being labeled.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do when you don't fit in? If I came here and I felt that I was not invited, what would I do? I'd find something to keep myself occupied as coping.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
That could be anything, and we can't judge that.
Yeah.
So what children are doing is finding something that makes them feel seen. Now, we've seen this very common, that when we, as a human behavior, that when we are in dumps, it gives us a sense of community when everybody else is in dumps.
Yes.
So when a group of teenagers are vaping or trying marijuana, they want another 12-year-olds also to do that.
Yeah.
And they're not being, we can't label them anything else but just being immature because their brain is not developed, right?
Yeah.
So this is so much more bigger than how the world probably perceives it. But what I see is every school, every bathroom, every nook and corner of malls, we even have a forest out there. Even in forest, teenagers are finding space to lean into addictive behavior. So when I say addictive behavior, now 95% of the addictions in the world have started when they were in teens. So even though we may not want to call it an addiction, but probably that's where the foundation is being laid in their brain for the addiction to get cemented into their brain, which is not completely developed.
I mean, there's a lot to that because, as you know,
one of the-
the brain doesn't develop fully until
Into
25.
Yeah, so it also goes through the pruning process. You're right.
Yeah.
But it also goes through the pruning process, and thank you for bringing that up. That by the time there is a phase where if a lot of things in their environment shifts and they choose something different, a lot of all this also like prunes away, just like trees are pruned, right? But yet the reality is that for a lot of others, it does turn into an addiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think
especially for smoking is what I would say. For smoking and vaping,
Yeah, I mean, I think there is that part about because the brain is not developed, and then if people are starting using substances at a certain age, and I'm talking about not necessarily so much maybe nicotine, but not to discount how not to discount nicotine at all.
Oh, absolutely.
But in brain development, and it does stunt the brain development. It stunts the emotional development. I think there's evidence out there that says that that people emotionally, once they start using substances, particularly around alcohol and other drugs, that's where there's often a cease in the emotional development.
Absolutely.
So I mean, there's a whole knock on.
It's just not. It's not just that the behavior gets cemented in. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it is through that brain not getting its healthy development stage where it eventually impacts the way you show up in the world, the way you have your relationships, the way you have or build your connections.
Yeah.
So it's
It's tough growing up as
it's very painful.
It's very painful. I mean, we talk a little bit about we talk about addiction, and a lot of people immediately sort of think about substances, but you did mention addictive behaviour, and I think if we look at this honestly now, I mean, I think we've had quite a few younger people in both in outpatient and in inpatient that have had issues either with things like marijuana, which is very prevalent. I think we talked a little bit earlier about how much more prevalent that is these days. And then there's the other part where screen addiction, gaming addiction, those types of things which seem to be on the rise.
Absolutely.
That's that.
Absolutely. Screen addiction is gaming addiction is a very big behavioral addiction that we don't talk about. Acting out, sexual acting out kind of a behavior is also very addictive, and I've seen that a lot in teenagers, especially, like I said, sometimes a lot in girls. And in adults, of course, we've seen impulsive shopping behaviors and so and I also am one of the firm believers that when we talk about addiction as a behavior, I mean as a thing, we should not just focus on substance abuse, and we should. And I know that you're a big, you were fortunate enough to attend Dr. Brahmbhatt's. I was like seriously burning with envy when I saw that. But like a big follower, I'm like literally like swallowed all his books.
Yes.
And he's the one who actually talks about the reality that almost all of us are addicted to something or the other. If we actually put a little bit of torch or a spotlight on us in terms of behavioral aspects.
Yeah, and I think also that there's that part where all of us have self-soothing behaviours that can slip in. We was talking about this. I was in a group the other day and we was talking about how sometimes when you take away one thing, something else comes up.
Absolutely, we've seen that. Yeah.
And I mean,
we've seen that even with addiction, especially alcohol addiction. We've seen that.
We take away. I mean, I go back and I can think of one client that I was working with, and alcohol was the primary issue. We took the alcohol. So once they came into treatment, the alcohol stopped. Well, so then something else manifested. Well, all of a sudden it was exercise, over-exercise. So we had to sort of address that. So we addressed that. The next bit was the eating, so the purging started. So we addressed that, and then all of a sudden we had all these parcels started turning up. so the shopping thing,
absolutely.
It was like a whack-a-mole, as in, so people sort of find something to shift the way they feel.
It's so fascinating when we talk about this. It's so fascinating because it's, to put it simply, if you remove people from the conversations and just make it about brain, it's exciting to see that one of the things our brain hates is not doing.
Yeah.
One of the things our brain loves is doing.
Yeah.
So our brain perceives anything, as long as we are doing it, there is a comfort zone around it.
Yes.
The moment we shift the gear to just being, our brain is going to fight us like a 9-year-old, throwing a tantrum. And that's where I think that thing which we talk about, that we take away one behavior, something else comes. So when I do these workshops with the youth on habits, just on habits, because basically addiction is nothing but a built-in negative habit that you over a period of time keep doing, right?
Yeah.
So when we are talking about healthy habits, I always bring in that aspect that when you're taking away something, introduce something which is more healthier. But yes, when you're not done in balance is where then it turns into. But I think the fundamental what I was trying to say was that it's the brain playing tricks with us about not being and just doing. And that's why sometimes it's there.
And that's a skill in itself, is being able to sit with yourself.
Oh yes. I think this is one thing which I truly believe, and I hope I'm true. I'm right on that path, but one of the things that I truly believe is that if we could help children, because I work with teenagers and I'm probably the biased around that, but if we could help the youth and the children be okay with not being okay, or work through the stillness or the breath, or coming home to your breath.
Yes.
I think that is always for me the door to everything else to fall in place.
Yeah.
It's just that if you could help them open that door, then through that comes self-awareness, through that comes emotional regulation or emotional understanding, or and through that they are able to be okay with them not being okay.
Yeah.
But so being still is a skill.
Being still, being still. That's that. And I think I'm going to finish there. I think that's a really.
I think that's a huge thing. Yeah.
I think that's a really cool thing to finish our conversation.
Absolutely.
That whole part about like you say, learning to be.
It's okay to not to be okay.
It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, learning to be still when we are not okay. Learning to be okay, not being okay.
Okay. All right. And just before we finish, anything that you would want to say to either parents or adolescents that sort of you feel that needs to be said?
To all my parents, it's tough being parents, and I have a lot of grace and compassion here for each of you. But know that you can make that shift of just 20 minutes a day, present moment with your children. And for adolescents, to each of you, it's never that serious. Okay, we are all having a shared experiences, and all you need is just take one step towards asking what you need and then asking it out loud. Thank you so much once again.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Binny. Thank you so much for coming in today. Thank you for some real great insights.
Oh no, I got a lot more too. I was like, wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah, it's been fascinating for me as well. So thank you, and keep up the great work that you're doing.
Yes.
We're really aware of that, and I think that's fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.